So I want to talk about process, because I think a lot of us don't realize that there's often a desert land before the promised land. And when you don't know how to navigate the desert land, you could be stuck there for 40 years. And so I want to talk a little bit about process. Now, I can't first talk about process unless I talk about something more boring, which is waiting. Nobody talks about waiting. Let's look at Proverbs 8:34. It says this: "Blessed are those who listen to me, watching daily at my doors, waiting at my doorway. For those who find life find me and receive favor from the Lord. But those who fail to find me harm themselves." It is important that we understand the process of waiting. Waiting and process go hand in hand, kind of like diet and exercise. You usually don't get one without the other. Isaiah 40:31, very popular scripture. "But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not grow weary. They shall walk and not faint." I remember in 2016, I was in the back of a church. I was just getting done ministry, and I was just about to end for the night. And the Lord stops me in my tracks. He says, "Paul, I want you to fast." I said, "Okay, God." I wasn't excited about it. I don't know if you're excited about fasting. A lot of people, I have friends who love fasting, who really have this expectation when they fast, and some fast 40 days every year, once a year. Other friends of mine will fast certain days of the week, every week. I'm not against fasting. I embrace fasting. I'm one of these people that if I actually made it something that is happening, systematically, it ends up becoming a ritual for me, and it would lose its value for me. And so I always told the Lord, I'll fast if you call me to fast. And for a couple years, he didn't call me to fast. And I was loving it. It was awesome. And so the Lord had said, "Paul, I want you to fast." I said, "Okay, God, when?" I realized that it's important that when God asks us to do something, that we respond immediately. This is something my wife showed me. I remember I was in the kitchen. I was throwing something away in the trash can, and I don't know if it's like this with you, but I don't like to waste trash bags. And so, everyone has an opinion of what full really looks like. And I remember I was trying to balance this item of trash on the trash can, and if it could balance, then it's not full. But if it can't balance, I got to take it out. And so I'm balancing. It's not staying there. I got to take it out. And I realized something. I have a son who's watching TV who could really use some responsibility. And my son at the time, he was 9 years old. And if you heard my testimony last night, my son is from a previous marriage when I was really young. And so he's about 9 years old. And my wife, Ruth, she refuses to call herself a stepmom. My kids love her and she loves them. And she says, your mom is great and she loves you and she'll always be your mom, but you can call me bonus mom. I'll just be a bonus mom. And so that's who she is to them. And so I told my son's name's Giovanni because I'm Italian. And I said, "Hey, Giovanni, I want you to take the trash out." He said, "Okay, Dad." But he didn't do anything. He just kept watching. I said, "Son, I want you to take the trash out." "All right, I'm on it." "Son, take the trash out now." "Okay." Like walking, but still engaged in the... And my wife, she stops what she's doing. She goes over to him. She says, "Giovanni, delayed obedience is disobedience. Or slow obedience is disobedience." And that struck me. Because how many times has God asked me to do something and I say yes and do nothing? Thinking I'm obedient when really it's just in talk and not action. And so I learned right away, Lord, when you tell me to do something, I'm going to say yes and I'm going to do it. And so I said, "Yes, Lord, when? You want me to fast when?" And he said, "November 30th to December 30th. I said, "God, that's not a great time." If you were to ask me, when I would fast, I would do January 2nd to February 2nd. Like, I probably need to fast within that time frame, you know? Some of the best cooking during Christmas time, where nobody cooks all year, and then all of a sudden they get out their family recipes, and they whip up the famous cookies for the year, or whatever they're going to do. But I said, yes, God, I'll do it. And so I was not looking forward to it. The part of fasting, you know, they should call it slowing. Because all of a sudden, time slows down. And I would be like, man, I'd be eating right now. It's breakfast, I'd be eating. And then lunch, I'm like, you know, there's nothing fast about fasting. But I thought, surely if God called me to this, something amazing and miraculous is going to happen. I'm going to set aside time every day, an hour, 2 hours, and I'm going to pray, and I'm going to hear and wait on the Lord for these 30 days because, I don't know, maybe he's going to give me the word of the year for the Lord. You know, like some of my prophet friends, every year they get this word, you know, to the church or to the world that they've prophesied into, and it's always on Facebook. Come on, don't tell me you don't have friends like this. And all of them have different words. I'm like, all right, who is right? Just kidding. But so I'm like, maybe God's going to give me the word of the, I mean, that's not usual for me, but maybe I'm going to get like the word of the year for the Lord. This is in 2016. And so I'm coming into expectation because November 30th is about to come up, and I go into my prayer closet. Now, the reason why people don't tell you what and talk about waiting and show you what it looks like is because it looks boring. Because I go into my prayer closet. Now I'm expecting open heavens, angelic encounters, you know, downloads of information that God's just going to open the word to me. It's just going to be beautiful. And I get in there and I'm... Speak, Lord, your servant's listening. I'm here, God. Where are you? You end up falling asleep and waking up. God, I'm sorry. Were you saying something? I didn't hear you. Forgive me. Now, I know God doesn't really stop speaking. I understand his heart for me. I know he's proud of me. I know he loves me because I know who he is and his love towards me. But I wasn't getting anything. I wasn't getting this rhema word from the Lord. And I was thinking, God, what's wrong? Is there something wrong with me? Is there an issue here? What is it? How come I'm not hearing from you? Why am I setting aside time, fasting, and you're not saying anything to me? Now, listen, I want you to understand something. Even though I didn't hear things after the first few days, there was something that was building in me, that was strengthening in me. I just didn't understand it. It was like there was this intimacy between me and him that was trust, that was beginning to unfold. And I didn't understand it at the time, but I felt that something was strengthening. It's really hard to explain, except I'm going to do a play on words here. Like if you asked me to right now bench, I don't know, 200 pounds, I know I look like I can do it, but I can't do it. However, if I went to the gym, I don't know, every day, every other day, and took a lot of supplements, eventually, I would be able to, hopefully, bench 200 pounds. I don't even know if that's a lot of weight. It seems like it. Is that a lot of weight for my size? Maybe? Yeah. Pat's like, no, I could do it. For me, it would be a lot. But there's something that happens when you weight train with the Lord. When you're waiting on him and he's building you and he's strengthening you so that when he finally releases a word, you're strong enough to carry it. See, it's often that you're in a wrong position. It's just that the time for him to release it isn't there yet. It's like you're in a quarterback scenario. You drop back, and God is the quarterback. You're the receiver. You're running in the right direction. You're going in the right path, but he's not released the ball because if if he releases it too soon, you wouldn't be able to catch it to go for a touchdown. Sometimes we're going in the right direction, we're running the right way, we're just not in the right position yet. And he's just waiting for us to get in that position. So weight training on the Lord is important. When we shift to a value of waiting, see, there's something that you have that is more valuable than any other resource in this world. It's actually, nobody can give you more of it or take from it from you. It's something you have, and you have a certain allotment of, and that no one else will be able to buy from you. You can't sell it. It's priceless. And that's your time. It's your physical time. See, when you give God your own time, what you're saying is, God, I'm going to spend my most valuable resource on you. And when you shift to a value of waiting, that is what you're doing, is you're spending one of the most valuable resources that you have on you. In Psalm 123:2, it says this, as the eyes of the Lord looks to the hand of their master, as the eyes of a maid to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to our God until he has mercy on us. It's important that we don't despise the waiting, because in the waiting, you're being prepared for the weighty things of God. Now, when it comes to waiting, we need to learn how to manage our process. In Genesis 29, it's one of my favorite stories. I love the life of Jacob. I love reading about it, and I love what the Lord shows me through the life of Jacob. In Genesis 29, Jacob is fleeing the land of it, and his brother, because his brother wants to kill him. His mother says, go to the land where I'm from, go to Haran, find yourself a wife. And Jacob, and I'm going to paraphrase this story. If I read you Genesis 29, it wouldn't be a good meaning. But I encourage you, read this for yourself. It's important as Christians we read our Bibles. I know this is funny that I'm telling you this, but the majority of us don't. And so make sure what I'm saying is true. In Genesis 29, it says that he goes to the land that his mother's from, and he goes to the town there, and he goes to the well, and he sees the shepherd boys, he's talking to them, and he sees this, my paraphrase, fine young woman at the well. And he goes to the shepherd boys, who is that? And they go, oh, her? That's Rachel. And he goes over to Rachel, and he loves Rachel. He introduces himself to her, and they find out that, they're cousins, and we're just going to ignore that part, all right? Okay, it's culturally, we're just going to go right over that. And that his mother and her father are brother and sister, and so she takes him back to her house, and it says that Jacob is so in love with Rachel that he works for Laban for free. Now listen, only love would make a man show up every day for 30 days and work for free. Laban is feeling guilty about this, and he says, look, Jacob, tell me what your wages are. You're my blood. I can't have you working for me, and I can't pay you and not pay you. Tell me, what do you want your wages to be? And Jacob says, give me Rachel. I want Rachel. And Laban says, fine, work for me for 7 years, and I promise I'll give you Rachel. It says that those 7 years fly by so quickly because he's so in love. And on that wedding night, I don't know what kind of party they were having. We're going to kind of ignore that part too. But for some odd reason, that night, Laban doesn't send in Rachel. He sends in Leah. And in the morning, I love how every one of your Bibles says this, every translation. In the morning, it says this, behold, Leah. Oh man, I've had this moment. I think we've all had this moment. We go to church, we have a conference, something happens, God touches us, we hear from the Lord, we get the promise of the Lord. It's like, and we, yes, God, to the nations. Yes, I'll be a prophet to the nations, or whatever God's called us to. And we're like, yeah, we're crying. And we sing worship songs that if we prayed them, they'd be scary, but because there's music with them, we're okay with it. It's like, mold me, make me, crush me, pound me in the sand, and God's like, all right, you asked for it, I don't know, just and so there's this whole interaction happening, and you finally you next week you go to church, you talk to a pastor, you're like, hi, Pastor Paul Martini, prophet to the nations, and he's like, oh, that's amazing, Paul, thank God he sent you. Here's a toilet brush, go clean the toilet, and you're like, what? Behold, Leah. God, you said to the nations, not this. Come on. I remember Jacob, rightly so, he goes over to Laban and he says, what have you done to me? Laban's a shyster. I mean, I'll call it, what he did was wrong. But you have to also understand something. Laban's also a father who loves his daughters. And he knew that if Rachel was married before Leah, in that culture, Leah probably would have never been married. And so a loving father, as Laban was, whether you feel he was right or wrong, said this: love Leah. Give her the wedding week she deserves. Essentially, that's a honeymoon in their culture. Give her the wedding week she deserves. And I'll give you Rachel if you work for me for another 7 years. That's the shyster part. I mean, that's wrong, all right? Okay. But this is really interesting. In Genesis 29, verse 31, this is what the whole thing just unfolds for me, because it says this: when God saw that Leah was unloved. Actually, the original translation says, hated. Most translators dumb it down so it doesn't seem so harsh, but it really means hated. When God saw that Leah was hated, Rachel's womb remained barren. When you hate your process, your promise will remain barren. See, even when that process is unjustifiably given to you, God still expects you to love your process. It's not enough to tolerate your process. Tolerating your process only reveals a character flaw that you need more process. I'm sorry, man. It's true. It's true. Tolerating your process isn't enough. He expects you to love it. I remember when I was in Global School Supernatural Ministry, which is a wonderful school. I just, as a side note, I love all the academic and educational things that Dr. Randy Clark has started. From practical ministry that's taught me to academic scholarship, through avenues like United Theological Seminary, Global Awakening Theological Seminary, the Christian online programs that we have, the summer intensive, that there's so many things and opportunities for you to learn how to grow. I went to Global School Supernatural Ministry. I had offered to be a pastor of evangelism. The pastor was going to give me a house. I had several parsonages, a house, a car, and a salary. I thought, that's the Lord. And through a dream and several other words, and Randy, being so gracious, had asked me, would you hold that off and intern for me for a little bit and come with me for another year? And I agreed to do that. And actually, while I even traveled with Randy, that church ended up going through a significant circumstance and letting go the pastor that they hired and fired all the staff he hired. So God actually spared me from a real tragedy. Becoming Dr. Randy Clark's assistant or intern is a high honor. And And you actually can't ask to be his intern. Often the staff has to nominate you. Then you go through an interview process and several interviews. And so it was a real honor when I was selected to be his intern. And I was like, okay, God, I was trying to compare prophetic words over my life. I was like, I thought I'd be pastoring, but okay, maybe this, maybe, you just start, how you try to connect the dots for God? You're like, okay, God, I could see what you're doing here, So I'm like, okay, maybe this is what God's doing. And so, and there was this, it's such a high honor as a student to be his intern. So I finally get introduced to the staff my first day, and they're showing me around these beautiful offices, and I'm thinking, oh, wow, and I'm introducing everyone. Hi, I'm Paul Martini, Randy Clark's intern. How you doing? It's good to see you. And they're showing me all the departments. Hey, Paul Martini, Randy Clark's intern. How's it going? Yeah, and then they show me, the big warehouse we have with all these pallets of books. It's just tons of square footage, and I was like, oh, this is great. Yeah, this is nice, and then they show me a tape gun. They're like, behold, Leah. What is this? What is this contraption? And I did a lot of things for Dr. Randy Clark with planning his meetings and stuff, but there was so many books that we would bring on and they needed to be packed, and I found out the intern's the lowest position on the totem pole. And I'm like, God, what am I doing? I gave up a career. I cashed in, life savings to try to keep going, and there was things that I did that financially I wouldn't tell anyone to do. If they told me what they were going to do, I'd say, that's unwise. You need to be a good steward, all these things. But I just knew it was the Lord, so I did it. But I'm like, God, what am I doing? I'm working 50, 60 hours a week. A lot of it's packing boxes, and I hated it. At the best, I was tolerating it. I loved being with you, Randy. It's hard for you to sit on this, but packing boxes was not my, high calling. You know what I mean? People would be going home because the employees would go home because they had 9-to-5 jobs, and they would go back to their families. And I'm there, in this empty place packing books. And I realized something, that this wasn't something that God had for me to tolerate, but he wanted me to love. Because there was things that he was going to still need to be produced in me that wasn't produced yet. And there was character things that needs to be taken out or put in. You know what's so significant is his first 4 children. Jacob's first 4 children are with Leah. The first 4 children is Judah, Simeon, Levi, and Reuben. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And what's so significant about that is the meaning of their names. Reuben means to see. Simeon means to hear. Levi means to be at one with. And Judah means to praise. And when you love your process, when you love your Leah, you produce the offspring to see him, to hear him, to be at one with him, and to praise him no matter the circumstance. So that when your Joseph's born, who's the epitome of wisdom, influence, anointing, and power, you're strong enough to carry it. See, oftentimes the process that you're in is purposeful so that God can produce in you what needs to be produced for what you're called to carry. And to tolerate it is not enough. To hate it is not right. But to love it is what God's called you to. I started to love that process. I decided and purposed in my heart that I'm going to make this the best position available. I'm going to do this with such excellence. I want this to be the biggest blessing for Global Awakening and for Dr. Randy Clark. I want to grow this bookstore thing. I want to grow anything that we can. God, whatever you put my hands to, I'm going to grow. I'm going to make sure that it succeeds. Not because I want to glorify myself, but I'm going to love this. And that's what I ended up doing. So I ended up loving that process. Fast forward years later, I'm now fasting 30 days, not hearing anything from the Lord, getting really strong in my closeness and trust with him, but didn't hear any rhema word. After 30 days of fasting and not eating, I had nada. But I continued to travel and minister and we did these conferences called stirrings that God had given me a vision for, to stir up the gift of God that's within the church. And it was focused on the Holy Spirit, renewal, impartation, and healing. And I'm going to church. I'm going to healing ministries and healing schools and ministering in this capacity. And there was this healing rooms ministry that invited me out to Washington State. And I'm in Pullman, the city of Pullman at Washington State. And I'm at this small group teaching them and equipping the saints for the work of ministry. That's what I felt God called me to do under the umbrella of Global Awakening. That's the calling. That's why I love this ministry, to equip the saints for the work of ministry. It's not about one man or one woman. It's about that we're all the saints. We all have the Holy Spirit, and we all get to play. It's not about surrounding one person. Although I do believe there are gifted men and women who are called to certain offices, I also believe that the church is empowered to go and win the lost, heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out demons. Come on. So during one of the breaks, we decided, hey, let's go to this. There's a Division I school called Washington State with this huge campus, and so we decided to go to this campus. And we were just looking around. This campus is so large. It has 30,000 students. It has its own pharmacy. It has its own stores and stuff like that, because it needs to be sustainable for all the students. And so it's kind of like the only thing in Pullman, really. Everything else is farming. And so when we're there, my friend who's sitting next to me, he says, man, as soon as we went onto the campus, he goes, I feel like there's a spirit of suicide here. And my friend is a joy person. He's never in the negative. He's always in the positive. If there's a negative situation, he only sees the positive possibilities. So for him to say that caught my attention. I said, yeah, man, I feel like there's hopelessness here. I mean, there's just something spiritual about this. My one other friend, he was with me. He's a prophet. He said, let's go to the bookstore. I feel like the Lord's having us go to the bookstore or library. So we go to the bookstore area, tons of students around there. And there was this one guy that my friend meets outside the bathroom, and we find out, he was crying. And so he's like, hey, you all right, buddy? And he's like, well, one of the prominent students on campus just committed suicide. And one of his relatives had committed suicide not too long ago, and so it had re-triggered all this emotion. And that student was a manager at Rite Aid, and so the school was suffering. And so we ministered to him, and then we left, and we're driving off campus. As we're driving off campus, I see this Division I stadium, basketball stadium to my right. And as we're passing it, going off of campus, I look at myself pointing at it and going, I wonder what it would cost to rent that. It was such a surprise to me. I put my hand down. I was like, I didn't even know that. You ever watch yourself do something? It felt like that. And so it so shocked me. One, I don't have any money. It doesn't matter what it costs. I didn't feel called to do a stadium evangelism. God, what are you asking me to do? But I didn't want to be disobedient. I wanted to knock on that door. Maybe it was a test. Maybe God wanted to see if I'd say yes and then be like, okay, you wouldn't do that. But we go back to where we're staying, and me and my friend, we look up and we said, man, if we were to rent this, when would the stadium be available? And we saw that the first Friday that school's in session, there's no basketball game, there's no football game, but school is just in session. The stadium's available that day. Or at least nothing's going on the school calendar. So I make the coldest cold call you can make. I mean, I don't know anybody, not connected with any church. I go on the website, find a number, which I think could be possibly the person, and I make a phone call to a stadium director person, and I leave a voicemail. Hi, this is Paul from Global Awakening. Just wondering if the stadium would be available to rent, how much it would cost on this date, and I'll talk to you later. Bye. And I thought, wow, that's over with. Passed that test. Never thinking I'd ever get a call back. But the next day I get a call back, and it's the director of the events for the stadium. And he says, hi, you're wondering about the stadium. He says, who are you guys? Are you a political organization? Would there be protesters there? Because there was a lot of political rallies going on at the time, and it was creating a lot of problems for the universities, and they didn't want to get involved in that. And so I said, I hope there's not going to be protesters. I said, we're not a political organization. And I just started sharing this vision that I had not thought out at all, but it was a God thing that I was saying them, like they were faith statements. And if faith wasn't behind them, they would have been lies. But there was faith. Because I said, well, we want to come, and we're a Christian organization, but we want to come and bring hope to the campus, and we want to bring athletes and actors and musicians who are leaders in the mountains of these influence who could hear testimonies of hope. They could share and then we're a Christian organization, so at the end we'll have a call for salvation. And he said, wow. I said, but I was just even wondering if it was available. This is only 8 months away. If you ever want to rent a stadium, you got to rent them like 2 years out. He goes, especially at a Division I school, he goes, wow. He said, it's really funny. He says the dates before are all booked and the dates after are all booked, but that one day, that one Friday night, it's available. I said, well, how much would it cost? Knowing that this would be the final door that would shut on me, because I have friends who've rented stadiums before, and they were $150,000 for the day. And I can't even think of numbers that high. So I said, so I'm expecting this large number. And he says, well, let me ask you a few things. Are you going to sell tickets to this thing? I said, no, it'd be absolutely free. He said, can we sell food there? I said, you could sell all the food you want. He said, I really like what you're doing. I like the message that you just shared. I found out later this guy isn't even a Christian. Let me just share a little insight. The world is looking for peacemakers, craving for them, and they don't know where to go. He said, I really like what you're doing. He says, I think, and I hear the man lean back on his office chair, like, you know? He goes, I think we can get you the stadium, every room in it, the stage for $7,500. I almost fell out of my chair. I didn't have $7,500, but I had faith for that. It was one of the hardest things to do. I didn't have any connection with any churches or businesses, but God gave me this step-by-step plan. And I invited pastors to a nice lunch. And I knew pastors like to eat, so if you give them food, oftentimes they'll come. And so I asked, what's a really nice restaurant? Let's invite them out. And I shared with Randy and the team there the vision. They said, we'll support you. We'll see if this Lord will support you. And so we were able to pay for a lunch for pastors. And I just said to the pastors, you're the fathers of this city. I believe the Lord's given me this opportunity. Do you want me to do it? And over 28 pastors and churches responded, and they said yes. I had a big problem on my hands. I didn't know any athletes, actors, musicians. I mean, I knew famous Christian, famous Christian ministers and Christian worship bands, but I didn't want to fill a stadium with Christians. I wanted to fill the stadium with the lost. And I'm sorry, but the lost don't come to hear often famous Christians that are Christian in the Christian world. I wanted people who are leaders in these other mountains who are Christian. There's a difference. So I called my friend who I had just met the week before, who was the NBA All-Star chaplain for the NBA All-Star team. Just a God appointment. And I called him. I said, hey, man, this is what happened. And I got this stadium, and I don't know what I'm doing. And I told him that there'd be athletes there. I don't know any athletes and musicians there. Can you help me? And he said, Paul, let me see what I can do. He says, that's the Lord. You got a stadium for $7,500. That's the Lord. And he calls him back. He says, I have Sean Alexander, who played for Washington State and Seattle Seahawks, MVP in the NFL, running back. He said he would come speak. I said, I don't have any money. He says, it's for the gospel. It's free. He doesn't need any money. And then I got a text message that Antoine Randall L., who was a Pittsburgh Steelers Super Bowl champion, wide receiver, said, I'll come and share my testimony. And then there was actors from the Fast and Furious and comedians who are Christian but are influencing in the world. And so God was putting people. It was the largest interdenominational gathering they ever had in terms of church unification. God gave us this idea to make it a on-site campus, that the student-run campus thing. So we were able to promote Hope Fest through the whole campus. And we did a private after party that was on the lawn from 10 p.m. to midnight. And God gave us this idea to do baptisms on the lawn. And so we had a DJ, and we had free food, and everyone who got saved, hundreds of students got saved that night. We pulled them through the tunnel. There was a businessman, he just came out with this new technology where he has these workout shirts that are gray, but when they get wet, the face of Christ appears. And he gives them to us. And we talked about baptism, and we had the athletes baptizing the newly saved students coming up. It's one of the most beautiful videos. I should have had it queued. I'm sorry, I don't. It was one of the best nights of my life, besides being married to my wife and my children being born and having my own salvation. It was watching these students come to know Jesus Christ. It was one of the hardest times in my life, one of the loneliest times in my life. And if I didn't go through the times of waiting on the Lord and loving my process, I would have never been able to do what God had called me to do in that time frame. I remember I was thinking about the altar call. God, who's going to give the altar call? Who's going to be the one to give the salvation call? And it was so tempting. Can I just be real with you? It's so tempting as a minister to say, I'm going to be the one. Paul Martini, the evangelist. And I can tell everyone how I stood on stage and gave the call of salvation. I'll count both of their hands. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. But I knew there was a friend of mine who was a better evangelist than me. He just was gifted. I said, I'm going to ask him to give the altar call, because I know he'd be so impactful and speak even strategically to them. And I just knew it was the Lord. And I think God was just looking for somebody who he could trust that wouldn't take the glory for themselves. I don't know if I would have been ready to do that. Like if I went out of supernatural ministry school when I graduated and someone said, Paul, are you ready to do stadium crusades? I'd say, yes, I'm ready. I'm ready. Give it to me. I planned all my life. I could do it. I'm ready. The reality was I wasn't ready. I didn't know I wasn't ready. God knew I wasn't ready. He knew I needed to be in a warehouse, packing boxes, loving it, using those times where I'm alone, where I'm just speaking in tongues and praising his name when nobody's around, building this character stuff in me that needed to be built so that when the time came, when God was ready to knock and said, okay, Paul, you're ready, I was able to step up and do it. Why? Because I learned to love my Leah. I want to submit this to you, and then we'll stand. I want to submit to you that your promise, that you believe is your promise, is a type of promise. But I believe your process will give you a greater promise that you don't even see yet. Why? It's interesting to me that even though Rachel is a promise unto Jacob, the promise of all promises didn't really come through Rachel. Jesus Christ came through the lineage of Leah. through Judah. And I want to submit to you that your promise is actually going to come through your process. It'll awaken you to your destiny. Why don't you stand?